So we can continue our
Yes.
chats.
Yes. Day 3.
Yes.
Quiet legs. Quiet lower legs, I think, was our topic, wasn't it, for today?
Yeah, so working our way down
Mm,
the body, basically, right? Started
yeah.
started with
Yeah.
the lumbar
From the
spine.
center down, and then we're going to go center up. So,
Yeah.
yeah. From the center out to the peripheries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, a lot of people have issues with the stability of the lower leg.
Mm,
And I guess different issues are common, right? On the one hand, you have the issue of heels up, lower
mm,
leg too far forward.
mm,
They may or may not be noisy. Sometimes they're quiet.
mm.
Sometimes they're noisy. And then people have issues of the legs kicking or being pushed away by the horse's belly. Some people have like wiggly ankles and
Mm.
feet. They're not even so noisy with the lower leg, but it's
Yeah.
the foot and the ankle. But they're all, in a way, all related, right? These issues.
Absolutely. And it's an interesting one, what you say about wobbly ankles,
Mhm.
because there's a difference between a supple,
Mhm.
absorbing ankle and a
Mhm.
wobbly ankle. The wobbly ankle, I'm going to make a generalization, so there are always going to be exceptions, tends to be eversion and inversion, which is rolling out and rolling in.
Mhm.
That's generally what happens, is that people have too much of that lateral, the sort of turning more onto the outside of the foot or the inside of the foot, and they don't have enough flexion and extension.
Yeah.
And the flexion and extension happens in a lower joint to the wobbly from side to side.
Mhm.
So, that's the feeling, when you fall off a pavement and turn your ankle.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's that feeling, and that's what causes a real a sense, I think, for the nervous system of a lack of support
Mhm.
and balance problems. So
Mhm.
yeah, often with that kind of wobbly ankle, what's missing is the ability to really
Mhm.
understand how to flex and extend in the lower part of the ankle joint below.
So, yeah,
Between the heel bone and the name of the next bone up escapes me. Someone will probably fill it in. That's
and,
kind of day, my memory.
yeah. And I think sometimes the foot also will, wobbles this way, like so that the toes go a little in and out. So
Oh, okay. So I think that must happen higher up in the leg. That sounds to me
maybe,
like it.
yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe
Yeah,
more of a
yeah,
knee issue. Yeah,
it could be. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah, that may be because there's too much tension, and so the you think the foot is being moved around too much,
Mhm.
rather than being able to, what I think of is it's quite easy if I put my hand on my elbow. I'm only showing you my elbow because this is what you can see. It's quite easy for me to shape my hand around the contours of my elbow. Yeah, because my hands are quite supple,
Right.
and you get that sort of softness and draping, but it also feels quite firm.
Mhm.
With our feet, they're often very stiff, and you've got 26 bones in the feet. And in order
Mm,
for
right.
the feet to be intelligent, all those bones need to be alive and know how to relate to each other. And
Mhm.
also the ankles need to be alive and relate to the bone above. And then the bone above is the bones of the lower leg. And so there's a really quite a complex conversation going on
Mhm.
between the toes, the long phalangeals, and then the midfoot, and then the heel bone, and then the bone whose name escapes me, but someone will fill it in for me, and the tibia and the fibula up to the knee. There's a lot that can go wrong.
Right. Right.
And very few people have that sort of availability and intelligence that they have in their hand and finger in their feet. Of
Mhm.
course, it is different because you've got much longer fingers and toes, so they're not going to be as flexible. But you
Mhm.
see people who don't have their hands can do amazing things with their toes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so there is a lot more possibility for movement than many of us can imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just thinking, I think for riders, the feet are often sort of a black hole.
Yeah,
And it may also be partially because we're always wearing boots. So the feet are always locked in and they can't move,
absolutely.
you know.
Yes. And it really reduces proprioception, doesn't it, to have that kind of solid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Mm.
yeah, toes basically, lose their flexibility in a way. And I don't know, people maybe brace their toes, or I went through a phase where I curled them somehow,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting because what you were saying last night about, we were talking about patterns of flexion through the body, so the people who slouch, they flex their spine, they lift the knees relative in the hip joint, so you get closed in the front of the hip joints. The knees flex more and the ankles can be deep. And the last bit of that is the toes curl under.
Interesting.
Whereas extenders tend to lift the toes. Again, a generalization. You know, I'm a toe lifter rather than a toe curler because I'm more of a, I like to extend and push my way forward through life.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's something that might be an interesting thing too for, if we can keep circling back to what can you do when you can't ride. Like if you practice on the exercise ball or something like that. Yeah, maybe flex and extend the ankles and maybe even, roll them and, I don't know, these movements and then curl the toes and lift the toes and just, how that changes things.
Yeah. And actually, even now, right now, I'm kind of drawing my toes up as if I was making a kind of fist with my foot. And I can feel how that flexes my ankle. I can feel how it flexes my knee, and I can feel how it flexes my hip joint a little bit.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I'm just sort of painting the floor with the underneath side of my toes, like I'm sort of stroking. And I know from doing this a lot, with the different Feldenkrais lessons, that if I stood up now, my right foot would feel more stable and draped and supportive into the floor than my left, having not done anything with my left. So these little things that you can do for yourself. But also in the lessons that we're going to post some extracted audio lessons that we did from the January lives. There's a lesson which goes with independent leg and aids, and it's exactly what you're talking about. So rolling the foot from side to side, the flexion and the extension, and how that connects up into the hip joint. So hopefully that will be helpful for people to get a more concrete set of movements to play around with and explore.
It's interesting. Yeah, sort of exercise I did for a while on the horse, like especially like getting on the horse and then warming up and stuff. It's an interesting experiment, right? When you start with your normal stirrup length, normal leg length, if the stirrup length matches the leg length, you should be able to lift your toes, so flex your ankle, lift your toes, so you lose contact with the stirrup iron a little bit.
Yeah.
And then if you lower your knee, if you stretch your knee down, you should be able to reconnect to the stirrup iron, right? And then you could repeat this, lift your toe and then drop your knee, lift your toe, drop your knee, or you can go the other way around. With your normal leg position, lower your knee, that should create more pressure against the stirrup. And then if you lift the toe, it should restore the original pressure, so to speak, right? And if you do this a number of times, you end up sitting deeper in the horse and your leg gets longer. That was an interesting thing. So it helps you warm up your leg muscles.
It does. And it's very funny, isn't it, how little it takes to change this fundamental thing for riders, which is, their communication of their seat. You do something a little bit with your foot and with your knee, and hey presto, the whole system changes. And I think it's, again, it takes us back to what we were talking about on Monday, is, where we have difficulties does not exist in isolation. It's part of a whole pattern. But what's really great about that is that if you've got a problem in terms of tension around your hip joints, you can address that from any part of the body and the hip joint will change.
Yeah.
So that means you've got a huge number of tools to use, rather than hammering away where you feel difficulty. Right. Hammering away where you have a problem tends to give you a bigger problem. That's kind of one of the things I know.
Very true. And actually this lifting the toes, lowering the knees and so on, when I did that, I felt like my thigh muscles released or my hips loosened up.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
So because I really felt like every time I do it, my leg is a little bit longer.
Yeah.
My knee can slide a little bit further down, until I feel like, okay, I'm sitting deeper now, closer to the horse. It was really interesting. It's also a good way to test if your stirrup length is right.
Yeah.
Because with your normal stirrup length, if you lower your knee and you don't get more pressure into the stirrup, then the stirrups are probably too long. Or if you lift your toe in the normal leg position and stirrup length, and you cannot get your toes away from the stirrup iron, then they're too short. So that may help you fine tune the stirrup length too.
Yeah, and actually I think someone was talking today about how she was really able to apply some of the stuff we talked about in the 2 days when she wasn't using stirrups, which was interesting. And then I can't remember whether introducing the stirrup made things a bit more complicated again, which is kind of what we touched on last night. That's partly because in some way our feet are really the way that we send information to our brain about our balance. So that how we feet contact the floor, it's very neurologically rich, which is great in some ways, but it also, the moment our feet hit the floor in standing or in an upright position, we tend to go very quickly into our patterns and habits of holding ourselves. So there's something actually interesting about having the feet just hanging, because it may mean that you have the potential to stand outside of your historical muscular contractions.
That's true.
Yeah.
True. It changes things. And
yeah, it changes
probably
things.
one of the reasons why traditionally, lunge lessons were done without stirrups, know, because that it helps you sit deeper and balance yourself differently maybe than you would.
Yes, something new and different, and without all that sensory feedback going into your feet. But those movements that you described are also a great way to change your, your relationship and your orientation in space, but through this playing around. My sense with you, Thomas, is that, this was your starting spot and you were playing around either side of this kind of spot until you gradually just changed where your starting spot was to something much more optimal.
Yeah, probably. It was noticeable. I could feel that my leg was longer and more relaxed and closer to the horse. I don't know if anybody would have seen it, because it's obviously subtle changes, but it felt better, more connected.
Yeah.
So that and it was surprising, because these are very small movements that you make, but you really feel like, oh, my leg is now a few centimeters longer than it was before. Very strange, right? And without stretching,
Yes.
and that sort of thing.
And Charlotte Zetterberg, who assists on the Aware Rider training, she did a really lovely blog on exactly that, on taking one of the longer lessons I taught about the toes and the feet, and then showing people how they could use it on horse. So as a little warm up when you first get on, you roll a little bit more to the little toe side of your foot and the big toe side of your foot. You notice where each foot is, because I think most people, the feedback from that was they suddenly realized that, for example, on their left foot, they had more weight to the little toe side, but on their right foot, they had more toe to the big toe side. And then, of course, if you imagine that your feet are like skis and you're doing that, that sets up everything to go over to the left.
Yeah, interesting.
That sets everything to go to the right. It's so minimal that you wouldn't notice it unless your attention is drawn to it through something like Charlotte's really great movement exercise. Yeah,
that's really good to do a little scan, essentially.
Scanning, I think, is great. Yeah,
because that's what we do with the riding too. When we get on a horse, we have to scan the horse and so how balanced is he? Where does he feel hard and stiff? Where does he feel mobile and soft? Where is he hypermobile? So I think it would be really good to do that with our own body too.
Absolutely. And I think it also gets you into that present moment attention, that awareness of being in wherever you are with your horse in an environment, rather than, halfway into your office or, it really brings you into yourself, into this, more into your interior life, so to speak. And I think that is it's a helpful, supportive place to be with riding. It's not great to be still thinking about, everything that's going on in the outside world, and to have these strategies, if you like, to bring us more to being more present is very helpful.
Good point. Yeah, it's very true. It's very true.
And never more so than now. We've got so much. Everybody is in this sort of strange environment where everybody is experiencing a similar thing throughout the world. So how can we take these moments to go away from that and bring us back to our ground, our center, our breath?
It creates a bubble in a sense, around you and the horse, and then you can block everything else out.
I like that.
Time you're with the horse. Yeah,
yes.
And then a little addictive.
Indeed.
You can run away from your problems. Just hide there.
I think that's so important, isn't it? And we wanted to do this series on how can how can we help riders when you can't ride? And
Mhm.
you know, maybe there are these things where these strategies that we're giving you, that you can imagine you're on your horse, you can
Mhm.
visualize how you might use your hip joints differently when you go back to riding, and then these little scans you can do on these great horses that people have built out of physio balls and saddles. I think they're absolutely fantastic. There's quite a few very inventive horses. They don't seem to have heads, or tails for that matter, but they've got a kind of body.
Yeah. I know, a little stiff-legged, but otherwise, yeah.
Hey, you know what you're going to do.
Yeah, it's great. It's
They've
great.
got a leg at each corner.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah, that's great how creative everybody gets, and
Yeah,
how much
yeah,
fun they're
it's
having.
been really fun to see. Mm.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, and just thinking, in terms of traditional riding lessons, ankles and feet are usually not addressed by traditional riding lessons. Teachers may tell you to, I don't know, bring your lower leg back or something like that.
Heels down,
Heels
heels
down,
down, heels
exactly.
down, heels
Would be
down, which
classic,
often makes people very stiff, actually.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But nobody talks about the movement options of
No.
ankles and toes. And like you said, how many bones in the feet? 26?
26, yeah.
Way too many.
Way too many to name, yes.
Yeah. And yeah, but that would be an interesting thing to explore, and then maybe observe how that changes things higher up.
Yeah,
How you
absolutely.
move your feet, and how does that affect the thigh, the pelvis, shoulders,
You can do very small things with your toes and literally change the tone of the musculature all the way up your body in a minute. It's people who, I often hear people say, oh, someone's told me I don't engage my glutes properly. And that's often set up from the pattern of how your feet meet the floor. So change how your feet meet the floor, and the glutes start doing their job without you having to kind of consciously walk along squeezing. Because I have had that, where where client has come and said, well, I'm squeezing my glute every time I take a step. And I was like, well, that sounds like a lot of work. There might be another way.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it's interesting. So interesting. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how traditional riding lessons focus on certain areas of the body and completely ignore others. Like the thoracic spine is the other one that just comes to mind, because you always talk about that flexibility of the ribs and the thoracic spine. And I had no real awareness before that what, you can move that? Or you're supposed to? Yeah. And actually, it's a big difference, right?
Yeah, and it does. And then, when the thoracic spine and the ribs are more available, things like neck pain disappears. You're able to turn your head more easily side to side. Your pelvis has more options of movement. So, yeah.
It's funny. Yeah, I mean, it's the same with the horse. If the rib cage is stuck, then everything else is stuck too in the horse. And if the rib cage moves, then they can go through the back and relax the paw, and they can bend, and that all the good kind of stuff. And so the mobility of the rib cage in the horse plays a big role, but nobody really thinks about the mobility of the rider's rib cage.
No. And it's interesting, I noticed with, really, really good trainers, you guys have an eye for where you need to go on the horse to change. Maybe you see the hind legs are pushing too much or not carrying or whatever. And then you go, oh, I need to go to this part of the neck. And then, and that's exactly what we do with the Feldenkrais hands-on lessons. But the beauty of the lessons that we've posted for you is that you can do this for yourself. And I think that's very empowering, actually.
Right.
Yeah, to have some means of changing how you move, improving how you move, reorganizing your posture. So that you can do the things that you love in a way that's more pleasing for you.
Right.
Less of a struggle.
Right. Very true. Yeah. Huh. Interesting.
It's funny, as we've talking, one of the little things I'm doing is I'm pressing the underneath pad of each toe and seeing if I can differentiate each toe and press it a little bit into the floor. And I've only done it on my right leg so far, but my right leg feels very, very different. It feels very like the tight muscles have melted away, and now I'm just a set of bones.
Well,
yeah. So these are little, you know, little things that you can incorporate into
Mhm.
your life, and they can be helpful. Also, just playing around with your toes like that, pressing into the floor, is very grounding in and of itself, and it's a simple thing that you can do even when you're with people. Nobody will know.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. You could roll a little bit. You
Yeah,
know.
all sorts of things. Yeah, you can make a little circle of pressure around your foot, and that asks for all the bones of the feet to change in relationship to each other. You get these changes in the ankle. It wakes up the tibia and the fibula, and so on and so forth, like a cascade up yourself.
So just, talking about this mobility of the feet, what do you think of these toe circles that are sometimes used in like lunge lessons and things like that?
I mean,
Does
I think
help?
it's fine, but anything done mechanically and just repetitively without much finesse is going to have a limited result, personally. I think you get much more about doing a few movements mindfully and with attention and noticing the sensation of the joints moving in relationship to each other. You're going to get a far longer lasting change than just doing this, which is pretty much what I've seen being taught. Circle your feet, and the other one, circle your shoulders, circle your shoulders. Yeah, it feels kind of nice, but it doesn't really change in a permanent basis if someone has got, their sternum is a little bit depressed and their collarbones are in. You circle your shoulders, and then minutes later you're back in the same place. So yeah, it can be a nice feeling.
So it comes back to paying attention to the quality,
Yeah.
essentially. So you'd have to observe exactly how easy or how hard is it. And
yes,
in some of your lessons, what you say is that, like, when you make a circle with your toes, is that a round circle, or
yeah, exactly.
not, or is it quick in one part and then slow in another? So I guess if you pay attention to those details, then it might be useful.
then things change more, and then often in that kind of example of what you've given, where you circle, you lead the circle, for example, with your big toe, and you notice whether it's round, and then the next thing you keep circling with your big toe, and you notice that your heel is circling in the opposite direction, and then you keep circling your big toe, and you notice that something is changing in your hip joint. So you're always paying attention to more and more places, and how a small thing like circling your big toe has an impact through the rest of yourself. And my experience, that tends to be what leads to changing long-term habits into more optimal organization.
Interesting.
I think for me, Feldenkrais is a whole lot of ways of training your attention to notice more, to make fine sensory distinctions, to discriminate between a better quality and a not so good quality of movement, to notice where you're making too much effort, to sense when you hold your breath or you tense your eyes more than you need to.
So it's a lot of paying attention, but also comparing
and comparing and contrasting. Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. That's why we often do lessons all on one side, so that you get the sense of, on the side that you've done the movements on, it's almost like you feel like a different person, and the other side is left as you were, and then you get this sort of contrast of, these are my habits on the side I haven't moved, and this is a kind of new possibility of how I could be more of the time.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. Yeah, and I mean, the traditional lunge lessons, they were often mechanical repetition, certain movements. Also the arm circling forward and backwards and all kinds of stuff, and hoping that the body would get looser by just mechanically repeating.
It probably does to a certain extent.
Might change the balance a little bit. But I mean, if you're really paying attention to the quality and then comparing the left side and the right side and all the details and so on, it's true. Then you get a lot more insights.
Yeah, you do.
Into where you can move or not, or where you even feel, and where you don't feel what's happening. Like that circle that you're drawing, whether it's like the circle with your arms or the circle with the toes, could be that you only really have awareness of a part of that circle. And then there might be this blackout, and then it somewhere else, right?
Yeah. And actually, I think that sort of, those blackouts in attention, that blackouts, almost like you lose track. I find that happens also, if I'm riding or in the other sports, I have these little blackouts in my attention where my thoughts have gone somewhere else. It's like I dart off somewhere. It's an interesting phenomenon. And I think the other thing which is really interesting, which kind of shows, I think, quite concretely that coordination and motor skills and organization happens in the brain, is that if you do a right-sided lesson in actuality, and then you do a couple of minutes, literally, of imagining the movements on the left side, you often get even more change on the side that you imagine.
That's so interesting. That's fascinating. That always baffles me.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because our thoughts, in a sense, or our imagining the sensory, the sensation of the movement, actually prepares the muscles to do the job of moving you in that particular direction, but without you actually physically doing it. I think there's something of that in it. It's the sensory motor part of your brain is always preparing you to take you somewhere in space.
That's interesting.
Yeah, you know, the moment I turn my eyes to the right, the whole of my system is getting ready to turn all of me to the right. Not just my eyes, but my neck. Something will change in my neck, down my spine. My pelvis will get ready. My feet will change, even if it's so subtle you can barely detect it.
How interesting. The power of the mind. It's amazing. Yeah.
The Power of Intention, I think. Isn't that a famous book?
Yeah. Something. Yeah, it's true. There's one. Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting, because in a way our culture is so action oriented, right?
Yes.
Do more, work harder,
you
know, push through, you know, whatever, you know. And that's the opposite, really. The Feldenkrais methodology is really the opposite. You know.
Yes, it's do less, refine, 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 do less. Do less, notice more.
That's a good slogan. Do less and notice more.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah, it's true. It's true. If you focus more on observing, you know, and less on doing, you know,
yes,
it's better.
And actually, that's interesting, isn't it? Because that was one of the topics as we finished up the first part of Aware Rider last week, was this observing self, which we talked about, like the watchtower, didn't we? About this ability to be able to notice, to attend, to observe how you are acting, how you are thinking, and how you are feeling, but not to be so lost in the immediacy of your reactions that you a little bit stood back, and then you have some choice. You have that little gap where, you know, suddenly you notice you're tensing in your hips, and rather than falling into the, you know, the hole, you go, oh, okay, so I'm tensing my hips. Do I have another option? Can I do something different? And it's much more like, you're like your own human experiment. You're like your mind is like a detective, noticing, observing, sensing what's going to work better, what doesn't work so well, going, oh, there goes my habit again. That's something like, that's what, you know, when I go into one of my, habits of thinking, for instance, I'll go, oh, there I go again. You know, I try to keep it light, not so judgmental. I go, oh gosh, I'm doing that again, Catherine.
Exactly. I guess it's a little bit like the, you know, 19th century or 18th century general on a hill watching the troops.
Oh yeah.
You have a little bit of distance, so you see what everybody's doing. Yes. But you're not in the middle of it where you just see, you know.
Yeah, you're not in the melee, the fray. Yeah, like your analogy of the orchestra and the conductor. That's, for me, that's a very similar. The conductor needs to have an awareness of the global whole,
so see everybody,
as well as each part of the orchestra and how they all come together. So it's an incredibly complex role.
That's true.
But I think that's right. We are then the conductor of our own self, our bodies, and our.
Yeah, it's a good comparison, because in a sense, as a rider, you have to have an awareness of what each part of the horse is doing, what each part of yourself is doing, and you have to have, you know, a sense of the whole, how everything is working together and influencing each other, you know? And
connected and related.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's one of the more difficult things in riding. I think that you don't get lost in a detail by just obsessing about this one detail, then you block out everything else. Or we're not looking closely enough at certain details. That's the other thing that can happen, right? That people sort of ride around and they're not paying attention to certain important details.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, Feldenkrais taught some lessons where, you know, he might go and sense your right hip joint and then notice the whole of you, and sense your right hip joint and notice the whole, and then sense your left knee and notice the whole. So kind of getting this practice, if you like, of transitioning your attention into a small detail and then taking it out into a wider focus. So you get used to this sort of movement out to a wide 360-degree awareness into a detail which maybe you want to pay attention to, and out.
Yeah, zoom in and out. Yeah.
Zooming in and out, yeah.
Yeah, in writing you can do that with a horse too, that you have students write something and then you draw their attention to one part of the body, and then you can ask them about a whole different part of the body. You know, like shoulder in, you know, they focus on crossing with the inside hind, and you can ask them what the outside hind leg is doing, that sort of thing. You know, come from the blind spot and say, hey, you still paying attention to that? Is that body part still doing its job? You know, and that's good training in a way. Trains people to be like omnipresent in a way, or
and
every part of the body. You know?
Yeah, and actually, as you're saying that, I'm thinking it also kind of trains a sort of neutral attitude.
Right.
Somehow, for me, that's what comes across. Rather than getting obsessed about where something is going wrong, you spread your attention, and in that spreading, you become more neutral, less involved in one bit which is frustrating you. So yes, that bit is still frustrating, but it's not everything. It's not so much in the foreground that it takes you over.
Yeah. In Zen, there's the same idea, I think, that you have to kind of have a sense of where everything is and what everything is doing, but without zooming in so far that you lose sight of the whole, you lose sight of everything else. And you still have to be able to attend to details, but without losing sense or sight of the whole, right? And then writing, that's really important. So that zooming in and out is something I do in writing too, you know, what you described in the Feldenkrais lessons, that would be extremely useful for writers.
Yeah.
You know, to do that. Pay attention to this detail, now look at the whole, you know, or if you change that detail, how does that affect the whole?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
now pay attention to this detail and change something. How does it affect the whole, the gait, the balance, the, you know, posture, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and actually that's such a different way than most of us have learned, not only riding, but, you know, at school as well. And I think schools are better than they used to be, but certainly when I was at school, it was not very creative or inspiring. And we were just told what to do and not to, you know, just to kind of copy and mimic. I think that was a big thing.
Memorize,
and this is really about taking responsibility for your learning, isn't it? And becoming your own, you know, explorer, so to speak.
Yeah, noticing how things work. More three-dimensional and interactive and functional, rather than just a two-dimensional painting of something, you know. And for me, that was always interesting to see how things work, you know, how things work together, and how it's like parts of a machine. It's like if I tweak here, what happens somewhere else, you know. That to me is fascinating. And it's always, everything is always in motion, everything is dynamic, nothing is static, you know. And
it's the systems approach. Systems approach to riding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I always found the most interesting, or the most useful, really.
Yeah.
What's the function of this? What's the effect if I tweak something here, if I change something there?
Yes.
You know, how does that relate to the whole? You know?
And I think that's very empowering, because you become much less dependent on experts. You become your own, you know, we've talked about this in some of the earlier sessions we did when we first met, is that you become your own teacher, so to speak.
Exactly, very much so. Yeah.
And
don't follow a cooking recipe so much. You know, it's like this painting by numbers approach. Like you know, put this leg here, put this 8 there, and then you know something is supposed to happen. That some result that you want, you know, but that's usually not the way it works, right? You try to paint by numbers and you don't get a very pretty picture, you know, or you do this cooking recipe approach, and then with your horse it doesn't work, you know, because he doesn't, you know, needs a different cookbook, different ingredients, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
If you use the functional approach, you can find out much faster what the horse actually needs.
Mm.
Yeah. And where you have to change something in order to get the result you want.
Yeah, and I think in that kind of role as the observer, of course you feel the movement and the coordination and what we might call biomechanics, but you also have the capacity to feel the state of mind of both the rider and the horse, which is so important, isn't it? Because if a horse is braced and tense because of various reasons, it's going to be very difficult for them to be able to move in a way that's comfortable and enjoyable for them. And then what are they learning? They're learning that they feel uncomfortable. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Very true. Yeah, it's true. The frame of mind and the emotional state are very important.
Yeah.
It all has to work together, has to interact with each other and balance with each other. That's a challenge sometimes, depending on the environment. If you don't have a very peaceful barn, that can be very challenging.
Yeah, very, very much so. And I think it's something which is really often overlooked in, I certainly in livery yards that I've been on, people kind of pull their horse out of the stable, jump on and put them straight into canter, round and round in a circle. And, the poor horse has barely had time to kind of get used to the person arriving, let alone learn anything. How emotionally where we all need to be in order to learn is no different for a horse. There's a learning frame of mind, isn't there? And a frame of mind where they're just anxious and stressed.
Yeah, very, very true. Yeah. I also find that our own frame of mind or mental and emotional balance is really important.
Really?
So that we can meet the horse on the right level and make the right decisions and so on. And if we're emotionally off balance, then usually the ride doesn't go well.
Yeah, that's so true.
If we're not open and receptive, we don't have that inner peace that allows us to open up to the horse, right? And really have a dialogue with the horse.
Yes, this conversation, this listening that when it happens is a really quite a beautiful thing. This dual listening.
It is, yeah. Yeah. Let me look at some of the
let's do that.
Comments here. Lucy writes this, can what you're explaining be diagram that was early on? I'm not sure what that referred to anymore. Some of it can be diagrammed depending on what it is. Some of it is difficult, of course, to draw or put into a diagram. That's always interesting to think of ways of how you can, make a representation.
An image, Yeah, and of course, different images resonate with different people, don't they? So, as with the water image seemed to resonate with quite a few people on Monday. Hose pipes.
And hose pipes, exactly. Yeah, it's an image that really makes sense to me personally. So it's interesting to see that other people find it useful.
Yeah, it's nice. Yeah.
So here Emma Tresner says, when you move your lower leg, does your horse change his movement or changes the figure that you are doing? It can. I mean, the lower leg has an influence on the horse, of course, but it's not the only thing that influences what the horse does or what movement or arena pattern you ride. I mean, the big picture always comes from the pelvic position and the weight distribution. And then, the legs and arms are almost like extensions of the pelvis that explain the details in the fine print to the horse. So if the pelvis is in the wrong position, the horse won't understand the rein and lower leg aids. But if the pelvis is in the right place, then you can explain some of the details and fine tune some of the some aspects of the movement with the help of the lower leg.
It's interesting, because I was just thinking, Thomas, that you've said before that some horses like to have more of a sense of the lower legs wrapped around, and some horses like less contact with the rider's lower legs. So I guess it's about having this ability to be adaptable in yourself so that you can, change according to the situation, the horse that you're on.
Exactly.
That for me is an intelligent lower leg, and
very much so. Yeah.
an intelligent lower leg cannot be fixed.
Yeah, exactly. There can't be a like one size fits all kind of position, because it depends on various factors, like the length of your leg and the depth of the horse's rib cage, the width, circumference of the horse's rib cage. I think we just had that discussion in the Q&A for the What Why How course.
Did you?
Somebody had that, yeah, exactly, about leg position and some horses like it if you touch them all the way down to the ankle. They get a sense of security, you're taking care of them. Other horses get claustrophobic and then they hold their breath and then they suck back and they don't want to go forward anymore. To some extent, the lower legs have a function of framing, like they're like guardrails left and right, and the hindquarters have to move in between those guardrails without bumping into them, and if the horse gets crooked, he bumps into your leg and then you can reflect him back to the middle. That's one aspect as well, that lower legs have. I think one aspect of aids in general that is probably not taught enough is that they're first and foremost sensors and receptors. Like they receive information. Because people always talk about aids as orders, giving orders to the horse. It's like this one-way street from the rider to the horse. But really, before you can give the order, you have to get information from the horse. So it's a dialogue where you spend more time listening than talking.
Then you can kind of loop, can't you? So you receive the information, you change something, the horse relaxes, or it goes the other way where you change something, the horse gets more tense or falls out through the one shoulder more, that kind of thing. Really,
so you have to have all your body parts in a place where you can receive information, right? And of course, in order to receive information, there has to be contact. And the muscles have to be fairly relaxed, otherwise they won't transmit anything, right? They won't let anything go through if they're hard and tight.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I think that's. I noticed with my own horse that I've had more injuries on my right side, so there tends to be more contraction in the muscles on my right side, and he shrinks away from my right leg. So I have to do stuff before I get on him, so that I don't, because I'm creating a big problem for myself, aren't I? If I get on and one leg is nice and receptive, and the other leg is minimally tense, really, and yet he's sensitive enough to feel that and kind of get, it doesn't feel nice to him. So it's really worth examining these things in yourself in great detail.
Exactly. And then another aspect in a way is this opening and closing of doors, channeling energy. Like, if you want the energy to go somewhere, you have to open a door, so you can't be clamping your leg on or pulling on the rein, otherwise the door is shut and the horse can't go. On the other hand, if you don't want the horse to go somewhere, or the energy to flow somewhere, you have to close the doors. Like if you don't want the horse to bulge over the outside shoulder, then the outside rein has to be short enough that the horse can't push that door open. Or if you don't want the haunches to swing in, then you may have to bring your inside leg a little farther back than the book says, right, to close the door and prevent the hind leg from swinging in. So that's why sometimes you have to have the lower leg maybe a little farther back to close the door, or you may have to bring it more forward to open the door. That sort of thing plays a role as well.
And actually, that's talking about closing doors. Say you use your thigh and your knee to close the door of the shoulder falling out. If you do that with too much tension, often I think the horses kind of push against it almost. So there's a way, isn't there, where you can move your knee in the lightest way possible with the least tone in the muscles that you need, and the horse will easily move away from it. So these are the sort of refinements that we've been kind of discussing.
Yeah, the horse. I mean, the horse's nature is to push back against pressure. Often, if the pressure is like sustained, the horses like to lean into it and push back against it, right? And so it's often better to give an impulse, give a nudge, and then like relax, nudge, relax. And you can train that. Relax your muscles, give the impulse, relax again. And then you don't get into the spiral of gripping, and then the horse leans against you, so you grip a little harder, so the horse leans against you a little harder. That can happen with lower leg aids, can happen with reins too.
Yes.
So you get stuck with a half hold. You half hold, the horse doesn't give, and he leans, and then you don't release, you hold a little harder. It's like, and then the horse leans a little more on you, and then becomes this death spiral in a way, right? It's sort of human nature and horse nature to do that, right? And so we have to break that cycle and then to let go, and then start over maybe, So, yeah. Interesting. Let me scan a couple more comments and questions. Asa Johansson says, I love dancing Argentinian tango, and the warm-up for the feet and ankles has the same purpose in dance, to become more aware of the floor. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. And particularly in the Latin dances, it's, like if you're going to do a Cuban motion with your hips, that's all set up from the feet.
I had no idea.
Well, Thomas, I think some Cuban motions in order.
Really?
Okay, now
I have to take dance lessons too. I know.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so fascinating. I have no idea. See, I thought it was all about, hips.
Well, the hips have to respond, but it comes from the floor up.
So so that means if somebody's very tight in their hips and can't move, then does it come from the feet and the ankles?
I think it's all of it, isn't it? And also, the Cuban motion in the hips comes from also this availability and the the Latin arms are really to do with the suppleness of the ribs and the thoracic and sternum.
Interesting.
And that also, the Latin arms go with the Cuban motion of the hips, go with how the floor works. So it's a whole body thing, like all of these things.
Yeah, interesting. Wow.
Can't leave one part out.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. And like Western heterosexual males are often very tight in their hips, right?
Yeah, their Cuban motion's a bit lacking.
Much more fluid. So
it's so true. Yeah.
Is that just cultural conditioning?
Yeah. I think it is cultural conditioning, actually. Yeah, I do. You copy your dad and you copy the people around you.
John Wayne,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the super
rolling from side to side.
It's very stiff in some ways, right? And very rigid in certain parts of the body.
Yes.
But looking very masculine doing it.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not, I think a lot of guys wouldn't feel happy, moving their hips like that. So it's an interesting one.
It's interesting too, actually, just sort of thinking about that some more, picturing in my mind, moving more or moving less. The rigidity, I guess, gives you a sense of security, being in control.
That's really
and letting go and being loose makes you feel vulnerable in a way.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting, isn't it? Because there's this sort of teeter-totter, if you like, between, yes, we need control, but not so much we get rigid. But the other way is dangerous because we might lose control and fall into chaos. So where is this place where we can kind of teeter from one to the other? Because I don't think we ever go, okay, we've arrived and this is where it is. It's more yeah.
So there's a lot of psychology involved sometimes, right? In
I
these
think so.
contractions and tightnesses. It's not just physical muscle tightness and this and that. There's a emotional, psychological aspect to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone's probably familiar with their emotional state ending up in their chest and stomach.
Yeah. Or shoulders.
It's a really physical feeling, isn't it? It's very lets you know what your feelings are. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So it's so many dimensions in a way that are involved.
Yes.
Here, Francis Seisemel says, tonight I did most of my ride out of the saddle to test my balance and walked both stretched much more over the back. The burning in my lower legs was so intense I couldn't wait to sit back down, and my legs just hung and are heavy and soft. Yeah. So she sounds like she was riding in a 2-point seat or something.
Yeah.
All right. And then, if you stand in the stirrups in 2-point and then let your heels sink, it will stretch your calves.
Yeah, it will.
And that will burn probably, Or sometimes the muscles in the front of the shin, they can ache too if you
For sure.
have short stirrups. I mean, that's something that happened to me in the past too. And then if you stay there long enough, of course, the muscles wear out, right? And then the legs just hang and then they're relaxed. Yeah, that's sort of the old school technique. Just lunge the rider long enough until
Until they're exhausted.
so exactly so tight that they have to fall
They
off.
give up all resistance. They're just like, oh, whatever. Do what you like with me.
Yeah, exactly. I had lessons like that from my teacher.
Yeah, it's sort of hot, sweaty mess.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's funny. It's funny how then eventually, yeah, you relax and you find your balance, or you fall off. That's like those are the options you have. Oh, here Lady Ganges says, will there be another foot-focused Feldenkrais lesson coming up?
Probably in What, Why, How, but there is definitely the short one we're going to put in the free group today or tomorrow. I don't know which day we're going to put it in. Yeah, and that one's called it's foot, lower leg, and hip joint, and it's called Independent Leg and Aids. I think it's the one we recorded. You may have done it already, Lee, but we will do more foot focused stuff in some of the other groups for sure.
So here, Stephanie Smith McGatchy says, or Katie Hirsch says, I guess somebody else's account, what are some signs that my lower leg is doing too much work? That's a good question. Like when you're sitting on the horse and you're wondering if you're doing too much work with your lower leg. I mean, you could think about whether you're driving every stride or how much strength you're using. You could try and relax your lower leg, or the entire leg actually, let your leg hang and watch what happens. Does the horse stop if you just relax? If you feel like you have to drive almost every stride just to keep the horse going, then you're definitely doing too much. So the idea in dressage or riding, I guess in any discipline, is that you would like to be able to tell the horse, this is the gait I want, this is the speed, so to speak, tempo, stride length, etc., that I want, and this is the energy level I want. Now go do it. And don't change it until I tell you otherwise, right? That would be ideal. And if you feel like you have to constantly drive or frequently drive so the horse doesn't stop or doesn't slow down or doesn't lose power, then you're using too much leg. And that's partially a tuning issue, that the horse has to know that he's supposed to keep going even when you're not driving, right? And so sometimes the horses don't know they're supposed to keep going because nobody explained it to them. But sometimes the riders create friction, right? By being maybe unbalanced or crooked, out of sync, bracing somewhere. So it's like they have drive with one foot on the brake all the time because of the whatever muscle tension they have in their body. So they have to compensate by stepping on the gas pedal even more, And if you don't release that that brake, and take the foot off the brake, then you constantly have to burn a lot more fuel than you would have to otherwise, right? And I think that part is something people are often not aware of, that they're bracing somewhere and that kills the impulsion of the horse, or they're not sitting in balance and that kills the impulsion of the horse. So they just automatically drive more because teachers always say more leg, right? Drive more, and it's more effective to take the foot off the brake first and check, am I in balance? Am I tight somewhere? Am I gripping somewhere so I don't fall off? That sort of thing.
Yeah, maybe one thing as well is that you might observe whether the muscles in your lower leg, your calf gastrocnemius and the tibialis in the front, do they feel always hard and the same texture? Are you always switching on to the maximum amount? What kind of qualities do you notice? That kind of thing, so that you start to get some sense that you can have different qualities according to the situation. So you might just switch on your muscles, as Thomas says, to give a little impulse, but you don't want to keep them switched on and hard feeling all the time.
Exactly. You just want to set
just enough for the job.
Yeah, exactly. Then just remind the horse if he forgets to keep going, you know, that sort of thing. Then a more extreme sign would be if the horse develops bald spots on his sides.
Oh yeah, I've seen that plenty of times.
Yeah, so that's usually a sign that the rider is gripping with the
Yeah.
legs. And the legs are probably also like rubbing, because the leg is tight and the rubs up and down. And then all of a sudden, yes, you see it in the winter when the horses have a longer coat. And then they have these shiny bald spots
Yeah.
where the lower leg is, right?
Yeah.
Or the heel.
Or blood from spurs. Seen that?
Yeah, that's a little bit more extreme. So, but yeah, so those would all be signs that you're working too hard with the legs. Yeah, and let's see here. Janessa Peterson says, I've been riding for 2 years with short boots and half chaps and just switched to a pair of tall boots. I'm so much happier with the tall boots. Leg foot much more stable, less wondering if my foot, ankle, lower leg is in the right position. The tall boot essentially does some of the work for me. They can, as long as they're soft on the inside, it's good, you know. If they're like stovepipes and you can't feel the horse, then it's a problem. So it's this balance, right, between the stability but also sensitivity.
Yes. Yeah.
And Jennifer Ann says, so moving down the leg, what would you suggest for awareness activities whole on a horse? I usually have folks take legs out of stirrups and point toes up and down, make circles both directions, lift the lower leg only using the knee or hip. Are these good? Other suggestions?
I think it's all fine. You know, but what I would say is the quality of how they're doing it is more important than the just doing it. So yes, you know, take your legs off the horse, but when you take your legs off the horse, can you feel your femurs moving in your hip joints? When you swivel your toe and your foot, can you feel that movement in the bones of your ankle, or are you just kind of twizzling it around? When you do something with your lower leg, can you feel the fibula moving around the tibia? Because that movement of, you know, inversion and eversion, like in my arm, you can see the bones of my arm are turning around each other. You can have that sense as well. So get them to tune in to their sensory perception as much as possible, and then it's all really worthwhile.
Yeah, interesting. So Cecilia Marlborough says, learning frame of mind for both horse and rider. I love it. Yeah, that's exactly it. You know, we have to put ourselves into that learning frame of mind and try to get the horse in there too. You know, so he meets us there. And then Susan Sobry says, your dialogue is so thought-provoking. Thank you. It's great. Yeah, we're thinking out loud, essentially, really. You know. And let's see here, Linda Steinberg says, yes, so true. When I relax my pelvis, I find I'm deeper in the stirrups without tension, and then I can sit even deeper and quieter. They kind of play off of each other. Some days it's the feet for me, and some days it's the pelvis. Yeah, true. That's true.
And having a few different places that you can go to sort of reset yourself is so handy, isn't it? If you always go to the same place. Yeah.
Look here, Caitlin Burek says, how do you get less tension before riding in a leg that tenses up? You
do a Feldenkrais lesson.
Yeah. It's true. It's true. It's stretching that'll do it so much.
Yeah,
but the Feldenkrais
stretching.
Always take tension out.
I mean, stretching can be good as well. You know, doing some of well, we all like yoga with Adrian. That's fantastic because she's very mindful in how she teaches. You know, she's really wonderful, actually. But yeah, do something. Well, try the lesson that we're going to put in the group, which is the independent leg and aids. See whether you like it. You could even take a snippet of it. Probably about 10 to 15 minutes long, that lesson, but take a snippet of it and use that and see if it helps.
Jackie Davis and Jessica Westfall want salsa tango lessons, Cuban motion. Oh, it's great. Gary Allpass says I took up modern jazz dancing to relax my hips when I first started dressage. Interesting. Yeah, that could help. Actually, in the barn where I started riding, there was one instructor who was a very good ballroom dancer. He
Yeah,
was a rider too. So I always thought, yeah, they go together really well, actually.
for sure. You know, I think if you've had dance training, it's going to be a terrific help.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you're aware of where your vertical is, you know, you're very clear about that. And you're used to paying a lot of attention to the detail of how you're moving. And
Exactly. Smooth movements, yeah.
yeah, smooth movements.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. It's kind of interesting with writing how it connects to so many other fields, you know, disciplines, and the people in those fields have an advantage. Like
Yeah.
there's, the dancers, I think, do have an advantage, you know, for writing.
For sure.
People, musicians have an advantage because there is a very musical aspect to writing.
Yes, absolutely.
Scientists have an advantage because there's a scientific aspect. Doctors especially, I think, have because they're used to looking at symptoms and then making a diagnosis and then coming up
really
with
interesting.
therapy, right? And so that's very much like what we do in writing.
Yeah.
Engineers probably have an advantage because there is sort of an engineering component to writing as well. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, physiotherapists, you know, clearly have an advantage because the dressage writing
Understand the muscles and the bones.
therapy. Yeah. And Feldenkrais practitioners have an advantage, right? Because some of what we do is a little bit like that.
Yeah, yeah.
You know? So yeah, it's interesting. Huh. Yeah, well, it's been
an hour.
Yeah. So.
Tennis Bolton says my years of ballet really help, and I'm a physician assistant. Hey.
Yes, there you've got two advantages, Tanis.
Oh,
we're jealous.
Exactly. Yeah. Well.
So we've put together a bunch of our free Feldenkrais lessons into a little bit of a free course. I've been working on this all day. Catherine came up with the great idea to do this. So I've been scurrying along, putting this together. It's done now. So I'm going to drop the link for you guys. It's a totally free course. There are 7 lessons in this course, and the affiliated Facebook group is the Feldenkrais Help Writers group, which some of you are already in and the rest of you need to get in there so that we can continue the discussion in there. Then the other thing is to join us tomorrow for the next part of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for doing that, Shanna. Yeah, I know it's quite a bit of work, but yeah.
It's a pleasure. I'm going to drop the links and you guys talk for just a minute so that everyone can get those links.
Okay. So what's the topic for tomorrow, Catherine? I don't even know.
Oh, it's to do with the chest and ribs, but I can't remember what it's called.
Okay, that's okay. At least
Chest and shoulders.
open your chest and shoulders.
Open the chest and shoulders, yes. I knew it's something to do with opening. Yeah, open the chest and shoulders. Yeah.
I figured it must be higher up because, you know, we've
kind of gone, we've been low for a while, haven't we? Everything below the waist. But yeah, open the chest and shoulders. And, you know, I think that'll be a really interesting discussion. It tends to be once we get up there, people discover their real black holes.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah.
Very true. Linda Carey was saying, thank you so much. Lots to think about. Donna Arnold says, awesome information.
You're welcome.
And, yeah, Shanna posted the link. So
Great.
7 free Feldenkrais lessons.
Every day we have more links.
Yeah, every day more links. Yeah, and links to the groups, I guess. Yeah, very good. Very good. And I guess now that the links are there, we could end for today. Tomorrow we'll continue.
Yeah, same time.
Talking
7 o'clock.
Yeah, 7
Yes.
o'clock.
Yeah.
GMT.
Great. Look forward to seeing you guys then.
Yes, you too. I'll see you.
Bye.
Bye.